So hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be talking about Sorrim and how to play it. So yes, welcome to the Sorrim Part 1 rule video. So to start with, Sorrim is a game, a trading card game to be specific. But unlike normal trading card games or even normal card games, Sorrim doesn't involve having a deck. Instead you have something called a lineup. And the simplest lineup you can make to play the game looks something like this. You have one fighter and the 3 sigils that are equipped to that fighter. In regards to fighters, there are a few important features to them that determines their synergy in an individual lineup. There is the elements to the sigils that fighter can equip, that fighter's ability, and that fighter's individual stats. Now the stats of a fighter are features that fluctuate the most throughout the game. Each fighter has 4 stats, and they are might, altruism, trickery, and health. Now might is a stat shown in yellow and shows how much damage attack sigils deal when they are successfully cast. Altruism is the stat shown in blue, which shows how effective positive effects are for your team, things like heals and raises, and shows how effective they are. The green stat is trickery, and that determines how effective things like hexes and wilts are. And the health stat shows how much damage a fighter can take before they are defeated in the game. Now moving on to sigils, there are 2 types. There are attack sigils and passive sigils, and the main way to tell the difference between the two is shown here, by this red box. Attack sigils are the primary source of damage in Sorrim. Now how they work is you roll a die, and if the number rolled matches any of the numbers shown within this red box, the attack hits. However, if for example, you were to have rolled a 1 or a 5, this specific sigil would have missed. Now after the attack hits, damage is calculated, the individual effects of that sigil are then applied. Now passive sigils are much simpler. Think of passive sigils as being able to equip your fighter with another ability in addition to the one that they are already using. Speaking of equipping, in order for a fighter to equip a certain sigil, their element needs to match up with it. For example, Mesdar is only capable of casting sound-based sigils. He can cast the sigils Lullaby and Restoring Melody because each one involves using the sound element. Even in the case of Lullaby, which also uses the night element, Mesdar can still cast it because it has sound as a part of that sigil. However, if you wanted to see if Mesdar could equip something like Petal Wind, you would need to check to see if any of the elements on that sigil match up with any of the elements on Mesdar. Now since the 2 elements shown on Petal Wind are Forest and Tempest and not Sound, Mesdar can unfortunately not equip this sigil. Now in regards to equipping sigils and the different elements that a fighter can have in the game, there are currently 10. They are Beast, Tempest, Light, Water, Frost, Fire, Sound, Stone, Forest, and Night. But now as you're looking at this, you might be thinking, okay, this is good and all, but how do you play Sorrim? In regards to playing Sorrim, it involves 2 players, and you can play one of 3 game modes: 1v1, 2v2, and 3v3. A 1v1 involves both players having 1 fighter each with their equipped sigils. A 2v2 involves both players having 2 fighters with their equipped sigils, and the final game mode, 3v3, involves 3 fighters playing 3 fighters each, and then each of those fighters equipped sigils. Now when you're starting to play Sorrim and you're trying to figure out what fighters and sigils you want in your lineup, once you've gotten all that figured out, you're going to place all the fighters and sigils that you're going to use in this game face down on the table or field or whatever you want to call it. You place everything face down, and this doesn't matter if it's a 1v1, 2v2, or 3v3. Everything is face down at the start of the game, and then when you and your friend decide that the game is going to start, you flip up all your cards, and then you begin. Now in the case of a 1v1 game, it will look something like this. Both players have 1 fighter in the front line and have 3 sigils equipped to that fighter. In the case of a 2v2 game, it looks a little something like this. You flip up that fighter that's in the 2v2 game, however you keep that fighter's sigils face down until they're brought into the front line. And a 3v3 game is the same exact thing as it would be for a 2v2 game. It's just having another fighter behind your frontline fighter, and then keeping that fighter's sigils face down underneath them as well. So now to show a breakdown of how the front line and the back line directly interact with each other, let's take a look at this side in particular. In this case, we have a team consisting of Mestar, Sphinx, and Flora. Mestar is in the front line and is in combat with another fighter. His 3 sigils are visible because he is in the front line. However, when the game starts, Sphinx and Flora are also flipped up. However, their sigils are still placed underneath them because they are in the back line, and therefore their sigils aren't really being active yet. Now let's say that Mestar was in conflict with an enemy's frontline fighter and he lost that conflict. Mestar and his sigils would be removed from the game, and then you would have to choose which fighter to bring up into the front line now. In this case, you could choose either between Flora or Sphinx, but in this case we're going to choose Flora. Once she's brought up to the front line, her sigils are then taken out from underneath her and then flipped face up, and then the game will once again continue. Now in regards to actually starting combat and playing the game, you and your opponent will first roll a die. This is done to determine who gets to attack first, giving priority to the higher number. Then you and your opponent will keep rolling and casting sigils to increase the strength of your fighter, activate effects, and chip away at the health of your enemy. When a fighter's health has been reduced to 0, they then have been defeated and are removed from the game, and depending on which game mode you're playing, then you can bring in another fighter from your backline, as shown in the previous example. Now, through a normal game, a fighter's stats can fluctuate rather frequently, and a way to keep track of these changes is through the stat chart that looks a little something like this. At the beginning of the game, you can place little counters or chips to show what that fighter's original stats are. For example, if your fighter had 80 might, you would place counters and little chips down on the 0 and the 100s column, on the 8 and the 10s column, and a 0 in the 1s column, to show that it is 80. Since stats are very likely to change as the game progresses, in order to show that they've changed, you simply slide these little chips up and down on the stat sheet. For example, if your fighter gained 5 might, the change may look a little something like this. If your fighter gained 10 altruism, it could look something like this. And if your fighter took 50 damage from an attack, it would look something like this. And now for starters, these are all basic rules to play the game. In this game itself, the stat sheet, as well as a full in-depth PDF of the rules are available on the Game Crafter, and of course I'm going to be posting additional videos that talk about the other features of how to play the game in a later time. But anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'll be posting up another one in the next few days, so hope to see you all again then. Goodbye, everyone.